Thanks for that great introduction, Stefan. What I want to do today is to cover a couple of things. I want to just briefly cover what this traction gap framework thing is that I talked about last year when I came, but we're only going to talk about briefly because it sets up the context for which I really want the meat of the discussion to be around, which is re-engineering the product process. So let me get a show of hands here. How many people here are in engineering? Okay, so about half. Product management, couple. Marketing, and other sales, service, support. Okay, all right. Well, good. I will try to tailor my remarks to address sort of all of these things because the product process itself touches all of those functions, not just engineering, not just product management. Everybody in the company is interested in the success of products. And we want to talk about that success, what makes them successful, why, et cetera. Or maybe more importantly, why they aren't successful, what leads to that. So a brief commercial here. So what is Wildcat Venture Partners? We're an early stage venture firm. The four of us came from other venture capital firms where we had been members of for 10 or so years. Those firms, the firm I came from is healthcare only now, so I don't have a PhD in life sciences or an MD, so that's not an area that I invest a lot in. And so I went to find a different platform, and I partnered up with three people who came from another venture firm, and we built Wildcat about 2.5 years ago. It's an early stage firm, so what does that mean? We invest in ideas, seed rounds, A rounds, and B rounds. And I'm going to explain a little bit why those have absolutely no meaning whatsoever, but those are the words that I'll use for now. What do we invest in? We invest in companies that are building systems of intelligence that allow other companies, so we're mostly B2B and B2B2C. I spent 5 years in engineering at Apple. I don't do B2C. So we invest in B2B, B2B2C companies that enable other companies to be able to prospect, refine, and monetize digital oil. And this is a fancy term for data. So the digital exhaust that companies are generating as a result of their interactions with customers, users, businesses, et cetera. Those are the types of companies that we invest in. And we invest across a variety of different markets. We invest in things like fintech, edtech, general enterprise, workforce innovation, and a variety of different things. So what don't we invest in? We don't invest in security, for example. Why not? Well, I didn't grow up in the security market. None of my partners did. We haven't built security products. That you can spend a lifetime building those things. We're early stage. If you're going to invest in early stage, you better know what you're talking about. You better know the products. You better know the market. So we don't do security. The interesting part about, I think, what we are doing is that we came together and created a firm that is built from the practices of what worked best in those prior firms, and we are all former operating people. So we all come from early stage startups. So I'll give you a background of me. So I didn't start my career in venture. I started my career in operating. I joined a small startup on Sand Hill Road of about 100 people called Oracle. And that small startup obviously has done well. From there, I went on to Apple. I ran a bunch of engineering divisions focused on things like object technology. So I worked on Intelligent Project and a few other things that you may have heard of in your history. Working for a guy named Dave Nagel, who ran a bunch of Apple Labs and a bunch of other groups there. I then went on to work for Siebel. I worked for Tom Siebel at Oracle. I was his sales engineer. And when he created Siebel Systems back in the mid-90s, I joined a couple years in. Again, there were probably 30, 40 people, and I held a number of roles there. The first, I started out doing marketing, which I knew nothing about, but I learned very quickly because Tom's not very tolerant of not knowing things. I then built the partnering program, biz dev program for the company, and eventually went on to run the products division of the company before we sold Siebel to Oracle in 2006 for, I think it was about $6 billion. So, I mean, it was a pretty rational, reasonable outcome. From there, I decided I'd try the investing thing. I didn't know anything about venture, so I joined Interwest Partners. They wanted to build a software practice. I knew a little bit about that, and felt I could learn the venture business along the way. My second investment was in an idea that became a company called Marketo. And we sold Marketo for about a year and a half ago for about 1.8 billion to Vista Equity. And we owned about 60% of that company. So that was, that's got a big happy smile, you don't get a lot of those. And the reason that was good is that it really helped build the franchise for us at Interwest on investing in these SaaS enterprise businesses. But I also did others. I did Workday. Anil Boozary and I were peers, so he's over at Workday. He was at PeopleSoft, so I invested there early. And a bunch of other business to business primarily, some B2B to C companies around enterprise software primarily. C3IoT is Tom Siebel's new company, or relatively new company. It's been around for a decade, but this particular instantiation pivot is doing quite well. I think we just closed around about $1.5 billion. Company's growing pretty rapidly. I think they found their sweet spot. So the reason I give you all of this is for one specific purpose, is because I want to talk about what the issues are with respect to product, because I've had to deal with this a lot, and I want to show you what issues that your peers are dealing with, and a lot of startups are dealing with. All right, so here's the meat of it. Epic failure rates. How many have been in startups here before? Okay. How many recognize this very dismal chart? Were you part of this? Were you part of the success or part of the group that didn't make it? Because if you look at the heart of it, if starting at the very beginning at ideation and getting rounds, only about 10% of startups ever make it. Make it being that they even return capital. So that's not like generate these great returns. It's, yeah, we actually return some capital to the initial investors. And it's these failure rates that really informed what we're trying to do at Wildcat, and an idea that dawned on me when I was at Interwest, which is, why is this happening, and what can what could we possibly do about it? And when we came together as a team at Wildcat, one of the things that we discovered through introspection, when we looked at our own personal investment track records, was that we had about a 70% success rate. That meant that at any one of these rounds, and we don't just invest here, I mean, we do invest in some later stage stuff, but of our composite investment track record across our team is about a 70% track rate, $1.5 billion of liquidity, real dollars out back to our limited partners, and around a 5-time multiple. So every dollar we've gotten, after we paid back all of our LPs, we paid them another $5. So why? Because there's a lot of really, I don't know if you know, have you ever seen what the track records are of Excel and Benchmark and Sequoia? Anybody seen what they really are? They're a lot different than what you might think they are. If you look at the fund returns for these things, on average, typically composite over year, a 2-times multiple is phenomenal. NEA hasn't done better. I mean, they've done one 15 years ago, greater than 2-times fund. Most of these returns are down in the 1.5 to 2.5. They are not as good as what you might think. Yes, there can be a great outlier. Uber comes along, et cetera, one of these. Absolutely, and those will be great funds. But if you composite these things, index it over time, the returns are not good. When we looked at our returns, we said, well, we're not the smartest people on the planet. There are a lot of really smart people on Sand Hill Road, and I use that as sort of the figurative word for venture capital. Why? Well, it turns out there's a couple of root causes, and that's what we're going to talk about and what I want to expose. So if you'll bear with me for a couple of slides, I'm going to explain a couple of things that I think will set the rest of this conversation up. And that is that if you unpack, and we've looked at the S1s of many very successful companies, we looked at a lot of our own private companies. If you unpack the root cause issues for these things, They really lie in two fundamental areas. They lie in the go-to-product process, and they lie in the go-to-market process. And we're going to talk mostly about the go-to-product process a little bit later. But what we realize as a team, universally, is that while most companies can actually build a product, when they go to take that product to market, that's where the failure rates occur dramatically. And we asked ourselves, well, why is that? Because in the early stages, we've got guys like Steve Blank and Eric Ries and really great people. We got books. You can go to Y Combinator, Stanford. You can go to all these great places and learn how to be an entrepreneur, how to build a product, get outside the four walls, reach product market fit, get to an MVP, et cetera. There is a lot of help with you in that product. And the truth is, over my 35 years of doing this, I've built many products successfully. We coded them, we got them up and running. That doesn't mean they've all have been successful. That just means that the team took a set of specifications, we converted those specifications into a functioning product, unit tested, integrated tested, then quality assured them and delivered them into the marketplace. Okay, that's great. Does that make a successful product? Samsung probably wouldn't say so, right? It comes down to, well, how many did you sell? At what margin rates, et cetera. So, I mean, there's other elements to that success. What we realize also is that there's a go-to-scale phase. That is, you've solved the product problem, you actually got product market fit, you know how to position the product, how to bring it to market, you have a distribution channel, you know what your margins are, now you're working on supply chain issues, you're working on driving down customer acquisition costs, et cetera. Now you're being scale. You want to amp that up, you want to move it into multiple geographies, et cetera, et cetera. There is a lot of help there. McKinsey will come in and they'll help you. Bain will come in and help you. A lot of boutique groups will come in and help you. One of my partners at Wildcat is a guy by the name of Jeffrey Moore. You might have read some of his books, Crossing the Chasm, Inside the Tornado, etc. Jeff has helped for 30 years companies be successful. He's Mark Benioff's chief strategy guy. He's Satya Nadella's chief strategy guy. He's well sought after, and the concepts that he taught us about crossing the chasm to reach this the mass market, the mass majority, these concepts are tried, tested, and proven concepts, and they deal with markets. Okay. The problem is, how do you get from the go-to-product phase to that go-to-scale phase? And there, if you begin to look at it, there's just not a lot of data. There's no real book. There's no go-to-market for dummies that you can kind of open up, read, and go, oh, well, I'm just going to go execute this particular strategy. It's all bespoke. It's usually myth and lore. There's not really schools for it. And the best you can hope for is to learn from somebody else who's actually pretty good at it. So we deal with teams, product teams that are really good at early stage investors. They came out of the best schools, the best companies. They know how to code. They know how to get a product built. But most of them don't really know how to take that product personally to market. They don't have the Samsung distribution channel. They don't have a marketing group to go to talk about branding and creating the color palette and the positioning for it. And they don't have distribution partners. Those are different segmented sector groups that take on those responsibilities after the product team has, pulled together the product, and in concert with them, of course. And this happens, whether I was at Apple, whether it's your Samsung, or it doesn't matter. Big companies segment that way. What's missing is a strong understanding of how to do this. And it's not just within startups, by the way. This is within large companies, too. Product teams need to know how to do this better. There needs to be a more prescriptive approach in order to help mitigate these failure rates. All right, so I decided to do something about it. I brought a concept to Wildcat. I said, look, I've been thinking about this problem for quite some time. I've deconstructed it into a very simple set of concepts that I call the traction gap framework. The traction gap itself begins at a moment in time that we call initial product release. You might think of it as an alpha or beta. You go from alpha to beta, you get a lot of testing, you polish that up. You radically reduce your bug counts, you measure your fine fix rates, you get this all satisfied, and you reach this magical point that Mark Andreessen, Steve Blank, Eric Ries called MVP, minimum viable product, and product market fit. Okay, that's great. Now you got to take that thing and you've got to be able to build multiple releases of it. You've got to be able to hire multiple people to sell it. You have to be able to create the value propositions. All the elements that go, the teamwork that kind of goes around that, has to work in a way that begins to generate momentum, growth, or traction to reach a point called minimum viable repeatability. And I chose to use the phrasing that that Steve and Eric created of minimal viable product because just simply people get that, we're all taught it, and I knew that these two new acronyms that I was going to introduce would be easy to understand as a result. So minimum viable repeatability is just simply, I've done this multiple times. I've hired multiple people, I've delivered the product multiple times, and I'm beginning to get a sense that if I do certain things, that it will result in a conversion rate in revenue, usage, whatever the metrics are. Then if you do that for a successive 4 to 8 quarters, you reach another magical point in time called minimum viable traction. So what is that? It turns out that actually when I teach this at Stanford and other schools, there's a whole bunch of science and math behind this, and we're not going to go into that today, but there's actual revenue, usage, a lot of metrics that you can apply to these value inflection points, whether it's a B2C product or a B2B2C product or a B2B product. So there's business models that are tied behind this, there's capital required to get across and all this. Now you may not have the same kind of capital problems here that you would as a startup, but you do have them. There's usually internal hurdle rates for IRR, et cetera. There's usually some kind of financial models that, that finance wants to see about your product line. So if you convert the word startup into product line and a new product line, then perhaps this begins to have some relevance to how you think about the problems that you have. MVT, though, for folks like us in the venture world and for our startups, is really the point in time at which Andreessen, Benchmark, Sequoia, and all the brand venture firms that you know will throw term sheets at you. If you can cross from IPR, initial product release, to MVT in 3 years or less, which is $6 million in ARR if you are a SaaS B2B model, you will have no problem raising capital at a very good cost from those very well-known venture firms. And that is what the Traction Gap Framework is about, and it's what we use it for, which is to rewrite the operating plans of every one of our startups. We use this terminology, it's how we talk to our limited partners, and it's how you can have a better conversation even amongst yourselves about these value inflection points. Because if you can reach them in the time frames and again, we have to use what public SaaS companies or public companies have set. If we can reach them in the same time that they did, then you'll be able to raise capital. And here it could be maybe against other products inside of Samsung that have gone from these value inflection points in a certain amount of time, generating certain hurdle rates that you can then apply. So again, I use these variable names so you can replace whatever your business model is with this. Okay. When you create your company or you create your group or et cetera, there's 4 foundational principles that are part of it. There's product, revenue, team, and systems, and these reside in perpetuity. From the moment that you create your idea, your product line, your company, they just exist in different form factors and they take different forms of precedence. That is, in the beginning, it's all about product and about team. But at MVT, it turns out systems become super important. You need the underlying systems, the automation systems to be able to get distribution, to manufacture, to be able to replicate at scale. So these different pillars take a different form of prominence, depending upon which value inflection point you're at. So what we've done is we've interviewed dozens and dozens of companies that you've heard of, LinkedIn, Splunk, Salesforce, and the CEOs that created these, to find out, well, go back in time, think about your company when you were back at this very small stage. What did your team look like? How many engineers? How much were you spending on sales and marketing? What kind of systems did you have? And then we've documented all that and exposed it. So that's the purpose of this, is to basically help startups become more successful. The purpose for us is because it gets us the ability to be able to help them become successful rather than just hope that they do. And then when we work with companies in terms of taking these and transferring these into internal product teams, these concepts still are relevant. Now again, metrics might be different, timing might be a little bit different, but the concepts work across all business models and all types of companies. Okay. So I'll usually get about, a typical presentation is I get 30 slides from a startup team. They'll talk to me about the first 28 of them are these great slides about, hey, here's what we're going to build. We're going to use a React front end. We're going to use microservices on the back. It's all on top of AWS, great. And in great detail, I get a big lesson on how they bolted together the technology. Then I get a sort of a demo or a prototypical demo or a slideshow on what the demo might look like. And then some kind of TAM slide, right, and a team slide. So that's what that looks like. I'll skip slide 29. Slide 30 is the ask. I need 500K, I need 2 million, I need 5 million. Internally here, it could be I go to whoever the product decisioning group is, and I put my presentation together, and I'm asking for resources, people, and financial to build my product. Okay. The problem is slide 29, and I call that the miracle occurs slide, because that's the financial slide. That's that hockey stick slide that shows I'm going from 0 to 100 million in 4 years. And I usually go, okay, really? Time it. Let's talk a little bit about that, because we just showed back in the slide before, where do these startups fail? Go to market. Where's your 28 slides on go to market? Like, how are you going to actually make all this happen? We don't just build products and they come. We have to get them into the market. People have to want them. We have to make them want them. How are you going to do all that? And how much is it going to cost to do all that? Usually, dogs watching television. No slides, no thought, very little effort in that particular area. And this is the big problem, and this is what we try to avoid. Okay, so if you care about any of this stuff, if you want to read about it, I was dragged kicking and screaming after teaching this stuff by a bunch of students who said, why don't you write a book about it? So I wrote a book. And over last year, since I was last here. So the book comes out in February, and I'm going through the editing process right now, which is really wonderful. Anyway, the net of it is it'll come out. So I told you all of this to talk about the product engineering process, because I want to be able to refer to these concepts as I talk about it. All right, so let's start out with an epic problem. One that not just our startups face, but you're faced with here at Samsung. Oracle's faced with it. Apple's faced with it. Everybody's faced with it. And here's the problem. The rapidity at which you are going to be disrupted and out of business it has always been happening, but it's happening at an accelerated pace. 52% of all the Fortune 500 companies that were present in 2000 gone. They've either been acquired or they're out of business. And that pace is only accelerating. In 1958, if you were on the S&P 500, you had been there for about 61 years. 1980, about 25 years. 2011, 18 years. And it's only getting worse. The companies that dominated the conversation, the economics, our GDP, have been replaced with digital companies across all sectors. I mean, this is not news to anybody. I'm just giving you, here are the facts. This is what we have to deal with. And you can either put your head in the sand and ignore it, or you can do something about it. So what kind of impact does this have? Well, the competitive advantages that we used to enjoy have disappeared. If you're a big, large company with great distribution on a global basis, you've got a phenomenal product organization. That doesn't mean squat if you can't move very quickly, if you can't innovate quickly, if there's these in-depth processes that the company has built that it takes 2 years to go from ideation into the market, because you got to pass all the legal hurdles and you got to go. Those things become problems. At Apple, when I was there, trying to get a product from ideation through the legal team, it was unbelievable how hard that was. Maybe it's great here, I don't know, but it was not great. And it may be great now at Apple. Cash cows, the things that we use, we build this great product, it's the gift that keeps on giving. These things are gored. I mean, they're gone in months now. We get people copying in China, people copying, and all over. They take our ideas, replicate them, and we see them back out, in our face in months. product innovation and go-to-market skills, these were things that were, they were great to have. Now they're mission critical. If you don't have, if your organization isn't great at this, another one is, and the likelihood of you being able to survive becomes diminished, or at least compromised. So the way that we like to phrase this is that in this 21st century, the top and the bottom line begin with the product line. Just as we built these great back-end systems to manage supply chain, et cetera, and these front-end systems to manage the revenue supply chain, marketing and sales, these have become big. The companies that have built these, SAP, Salesforce, others, Workday, these companies are multi-billion-dollar companies. What's missing? Well, they represent two big white space areas that have now been covered. What about an enterprise class product? What about something to help us manage the product process? How many here have bachelor's or master's in product management? Engineering, probably, marketing, et cetera, right? But where are the schools? Where's the MIT course, undergrad, grad school, postdoc, in product? The only thing close are things like Procter & Gamble, where you graduate and you go into their program and they run you through this year-long thing and they teach you how to become a brand manager and how to manage. They built their own technology to do this in their own process. But in terms of formal stuff, the best we have are things like business model canvas, right? We read about it and then we use that stuff. How many of you know how to actually use that? How many of you actually do use it? Yeah, maybe here and there. Nothing exists to do this. So that leads us to the following. What is the product process? What one should we use? How do we develop it? Do we know it's good? How do we know it's good? Etc. So a number of universities over the course of the last decade, 2 decades, have run many different surveys around product. And what they've discovered is as bad as the go-to-market problem is, there is a big problem in go-to-product. These represent failure rates across multiple industries and multiple types of products. So it's not limited to just tech. It's across all industries. And these were taken over various points in time. This problem is pervasive globally. And companies that fail to solve it, think about the GDP problem here. Think about how much, one of the studies, the MIT study, discovered that roughly 46% of all R&D is waste. Well, if we add that up across the globe, what percent of GDP for any individual country does that represent? That's colossal waste. Why? So why did these things fail? Number one, lack of market input. We'll talk a little bit, what is market input? I'll discuss that in a second. Ad hoc methodologies. We make it up. We have some good people. They went to good schools. I got Excel. I'm just going to build a spreadsheet. We kind of put this together, and that's going to be our process. It might be a good one, by the way. It's not really a formal one. Poor product analytics. It's amazing. And by the way, this statement, I'll share you the results here of this survey we did. This statement here about it's amazing how little we get in terms of true customer or market input, universal. And I would say that we've somewhat done this to ourselves as companies, especially in software with agile development. I think about, we used to use waterfall, and so we do 2 big releases, one primary, maybe a secondary every year. And you have enough time in products, in the engineering side and the product management side and product marketing side, to kind of at least get some market input and convert that into an MRD that goes into a PRD that gets into the product. But with Agile, we get like 3 weeks. We get to run some sprints, and then, oh my God, we can't get technical debt delivered out of this thing this time. We'll postpone that stuff off. Oh, there's a key set of features. We know we need to do it, but we can't get there. And I don't really have time to go interview a whole bunch of people to figure this stuff out. We're just going to go with what we know. So we get incrementalism, the incremental innovation. But what about true disruptive innovation? All right. So Those are the three primary reasons. So we decided to do our own survey, Wildcat. We decided to sponsor our own survey. We said, okay, well, these guys did all this, but it could have been done a decade ago. Some of these were maybe 15 years ago. We wanted a recent survey to figure out what was the state. I mean, maybe there were product degrees now. Maybe people were doing phenomenal product work. Maybe there was process. So we went out and interviewed more than 2,000 companies. Half of them were tech. The other half was cross-industry, across all different sizes of companies and different people who were involved in the product process, because we wanted to make it real. We wanted to be able to figure out what was really going on here, and what had been going on, was it continuing to go on. And here's what we found. 85% said that the go-to-product process was fundamentally needed. Market input, they felt, was key to the success of the product. And that current market input assessment was lacking. They gave themselves a grade of C, D, or F in their ability to do this. So what about leading companies? What were they doing? What were leading companies doing? Well, they did do, 34% of these did do a great job in terms of best practices, but most didn't. Most aspire to leverage this data, but most didn't. You'll notice that the B2C companies, I think Samsung will probably fall into this as well. B2C companies tend to do actually a much better job than B2B, but it's still problematic. Chief Product Officer said, what we really need to do is to identify and standardize on product management practices. And I would argue it's not just product management, it's the product process. Sales, marketing, service, support, engineering. It's a team sport. It's not just one group. Everybody has to be involved in it, and everybody has to understand what that process is. All right. So what I want to introduce to you is a concept. So one thing that Mark Benioff did a phenomenal job, he did many things, but one thing he did really well was he positioned his company, and he did it through that big, stupid international signal that said, no software. Does everybody remember when he did that? And he didn't talk about multi-tenancy, and he didn't talk about, we didn't call it cloud computing back then, but he didn't talk about these back-end computer science issues. What he did was he just picked a symbol that we all got, which was, hey, you don't have to build, pay for software the way that you've done it before, and was able to engage in a conversation that was provocative. And I'm arguing that market first is that no software sign for product, which is we need to become market first. And I want to explain what that means to you, because I think we all have a certain idea of what that means, but I think this may be slightly different than what you're thinking of. Okay, so what I want you to think about is, instead of thinking about product market fit, I'd like you to think about market product fit. So who cares about words? Well, lawyers care about words, but marketers care about words, and I think positioning is about words. Market product fit is about thinking about the market first. Without a market, there's no need for your product. So how sure are you that you really have a market for your product? Well, I went out and I talked to 3 customers, over here, et cetera. The market isn't customers. And think about anything, any product that you guys ship in any area, whether it's storage, it doesn't matter. Anything. You own a certain portion of the market. The rest of the market belongs to others or no one. Why haven't they bought? That's the market you really need to worry about. Yes, you need to worry about customers. That's right. But why aren't you attacking aggressively to understand why people haven't bought? What is the rest of the market? So, real simple concept, to stop thinking about products and moving to market, stop being just customer driven and moving to market driven. You need to make decisions based upon facts and data, not opinions. So, I think you probably heard making decisions based on HIPPO, highest paid person in the organization. Whoever shows up in that particular meeting makes the call. That's what we're doing. A lot of times it's completely orthogonal at best, or completely disconnected from really what the market wants. So you want to know why those product failure rates are up there? Because we build a lot of products based upon HIPPO. We don't base on it. And then you're left in the position, well, he is a CEO and or he's a GM or whatever. I can't really say. I can't tell her what I'm really thinking. Because if you do, maybe they're really difficult to work with, or maybe that'll be the last day that you work there. I've had those experiences. So we need facts. If you're going to stand up to Hippo, you got to have facts, data, and be quantitatively driven. If you have the facts and they are validated statistically, it's really hard to refute them. We need a data-driven process, and we need to stop talking about just the solution. We need to focus on the problem. And I like to think about it outside the box. That is, okay, great. We know what the current thing is, but really, what does the market really want? So this is where we need to go from to. And this is a way to think about it. So if you were to build a formal market-first process, you might start out with some strategy, where you come up with some initial ideas. This is for disruptive or sustaining innovation, so either way. We move to planning it, we need to design it, and there's obviously every step of the way we need to validate whether our thought processes and our decisions are valid. We need to work with other teams to do that, and we need to be able to store along the way the decisions that we've made so we know who's made those decisions, why they made them, so we can go back and look at them, and we can compare and analyze, and because we can't measure it. It's hard to it's hard to really manage it. So if we were to look at a market-first process, we might think of this as our formal methodology, and we might think about a suite of solutions that we might want to use to be able to solve for it. Okay. So what are the 3 principles that are applied against that process? Well, 1, we need to be able to capture and monitor market signals. We need to continuously measure and test them, and we need to make data-driven. It's pretty simple. I mean, again, these frameworks and these concepts, they need to be very simple, but no software. It needs to just be, people get it, easy to digest, and easy for people to be able to communicate with one another. And so while there can be major complexity underneath all of this, it just needs to be straightforward and simple. And that's what I've tried to reduce it down to here. All right. Where do these market signals come from? Customers, prospects, ecosystem, partners, employees. And how do you collect them? Well, discovery interviews, smoke tests, NPS scores, A/B testing, etc. The biggest problem is not that we found in these surveys and then with our own personal experiences. It's not that teams don't want to be able to collect these. It's that when you only have 3 weeks to be able to do some of this, it's virtually impossible. Traditional market research, do you have a market research group here that you use? Is there a team that does that? Most of them probably have some kind of, they might have like a PhD in statistics, maybe not, but maybe they do. They know how to structure a well-textured market survey. They know how to go out and develop the panel, all those things. But I just asked the question, how many of you have bachelor's, master's, PhDs in product management? Well, none. Well, if you're going to really be a product manager, you need to know how to do this. So, okay, great. I don't know how to do it. I'm outsourcing it. I go to the market research team, or I use an outsourced group like Market Tools or one of the myriad of them. And I asked them, I said, I need to do research. So what happens as a result of that? The result is that $500,000 later, 9 months later, I might get some data. In the meantime, disruptive transformation is occurring, and my competitors have come out with several products. No one has any tolerance for this. So in Silicon Valley, yeah, we do market research. 3 days, give me whatever you can get. So my N of 4 equals my market research, and that's what typically happens. And again, I'm sure you don't do that, but I know a lot of companies that do. All right. Here's an example of a market-first solution. This is an example, I think, thinking outside the box. This idea about looking at the problem from a different point of view. So Kawasaki introduced this thing called the jet ski. I think we're all familiar with this. Back in 1972, part of the personal watercraft market space, they introduced this category. And so when they found out that people, when they asked people what do they want to do to improve the jet ski, people said, you know, my knees hurt. You know, I have to kneel in this thing. And so Kawasaki came back and said, hey, let's add more padding and bottom on the sides. CDU said, we have a different idea. When we did our research, we think it's a pretty good idea. But when we talked to people, and they said that, gee, my feet and knees are fatigued and I'm tired and sore, they rethought the process. That is, they went through a different viewpoint. They took market feedback, market input, and rethought the problem and came out with a new category called the wave runner. This is just one example. I mean, in the book I got like a whole bunch of others, B2B, whatever. What matters is that it all is embodied through this sort of market first process. And it requires the ability for the entire company, from the CEO down, to adopt it. It's kind of the same thing around CRM. We had to get CEOs to adopt that before anybody else in the company would adopt it, and eventually now it's permeated everything. Same thing for ERP. I remember when we introduced, we brought in supply chain management in Apple, SAP, back in, I don't know, 1993 or something like that. And I mean, it was hard to get us to adopt that. And but eventually, now it's there and it's part of the company. I think this requires the same kind of energy. It requires CEO on down to be able to push this market first process, because you know why? It's hard and it takes time and it takes a commitment from engineering, product, sales, marketing to do it. Okay, so I'm wrapping up here. Because of this, because of the issue around category, go to market, go to product, and one of the primary problems is thinking about category creation, I actually introduced a brand new value inflection point called minimum viable category, because it turns out that 76% of all profits, and you can read a great book called Play Bigger, it'll show you this in great detail, 76% of all profits go to the category king. You want to be the category king. You do not want to be second, you don't want to be third. Anything after that, you might as well get out of the market. 76%. So you want to be the category king. What doesn't work is going into somebody else's market and trying to compete against them. You have to redefine it. So if it's an existing product in an existing market, you want to redefine it. So the reason I bring this up is because you think that building your product is about product engineering. It is. But unless you do market engineering, you're dead. People are terrible at this. Most groups I work with, most product teams are terrible at market engineering. And those two things have to be done concurrently while you're doing the go-to-market stuff. If you're not doing it, and you're not getting it from your product management team or your product marketing team, if you're on the engineering side, I would call a halt and say, no, we need to spend time on market engineering. What are we going to do to make a market here? Create it. And that's what minimum viable category is about. And if you want to read about it, again, it's in the book. So the reason I bring this up is because I think this is critically important, because we're going to tie it all together. The traction gap, as it fits against the market first process, from ideation through minimum viable category, initial product release, MVP, MVR, and MBT. This, if we can, as product people, change our process, just like the CRM process has been changed, the ERP processes have been changed. If we can adapt to this and we can begin to inject true market first process into our products, I think we can change that failure rate. Now, we may not be able to change it by 50%, but even if, remember, 46% of all R&D goes away. So even small incremental changes in failure rates are going to drive phenomenal returns for our companies. And that's the reason I'm bullish on this. And so my final point here, I got sick and tired of waiting for somebody to solve this problem. So I started my own company to do it. So the only reason I bring this up is because, so we've got some great companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, and others who want to try the software we're going to start this summer. I brought two members of OBO, which is the name of the company, here today. If any of this is of any interest in figuring out how to do market-first research with these types of tools that convert into feature prioritization engine that is contained in a system of record, et cetera. If that is of any interest into your particular area, then they're here. They're happy to talk to you. John Bartlett, Julie Gibbs with OBO. So if you'd like to talk to them, they're here and available. If not, that's fine. The reason I wanted them here and to say this is because I wanted to make sure that even though I'm the chairman and founder of the company, I'm not involved day to day in the operations of it. And I wanted to make sure that that the messaging that I was delivering here today was aligned with what we're actually doing. And so I'm pretty convinced we are. But I think this is super important. There's few challenges I've taken on in my lifetime to transform industries. At Oracle, built the relational database industry. Siebel built CRM. Marketo, we built market automation. The reason I bring this up is I think this is a big, big area. It's a big, big problem for all of us. And whether you use, our particular tool or not, I think this concept and these processes are super important. So anyway, I'll turn it over to, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any of them and dig into any detail, whether it's technical or marketing or whatever you want to talk about. And thank you for your time.